Soft, spongy, and versatile. In this video, you'll learn how to make a pan di Spagna sponge cake to perfection, whether you're baking a tall sponge cake or baking the cake in a jelly roll pan. Once you've mastered this sponge cake, you'll be able to master them all.
Sponge cakes are incredibly easy to make, as long as you know a few simple tricks.
Pan di Spagna traditionally has just 3 ingredients: eggs, sugar, and flour. To make a pan di Spagna, we add 6 whole cold eggs to a large bowl. The pan di Spagna originated during the Renaissance. In that recipe, only egg was used for leavening, just as we are doing in this recipe. To that, we add granulated sugar and the zest from 1 lemon. This cake is easy but requires a lot of whipping, so it's best to use a stand mixer if you've got one. Here I'm using a KitchenAid Heavy Duty, which is similar to the KitchenAid Pro series sold in the US. The biggest mistake people make when whipping eggs is whipping eggs that aren't warm enough. Leaving eggs out at room temperature gives too much room for error. So here we are just using cold eggs and simply adding 3 tablespoons of hot water right after we start whipping the eggs. This will give us the perfect temperature for whipping. Now I'm whipping the eggs at medium speed, a 6 on my stand mixer, and I'm setting the timer for 15 minutes. We are looking for super pale, fluffy eggs. When we flick our eggs, they should hold their shape and sit on top of the rest of the egg mixture. We're not there yet. And now we have the right consistency. While the eggs are whipping, I'm sifting together cornstarch and flour. Time to fold in the flour. Sift about a tablespoon of the flour mixture at a time into the eggs. Never sift in too much flour at once. The result will be a clumpy, uneven batter. Here's a little tip. If the whipped eggs start to sink under the weight of the flour, you are adding too much. When folding in the flour, I always give it a couple of shallow stirs and then begin to fold the flour in gently with a bottom to top motion, like this. Occasionally cutting the egg down the middle with my spatula to help better incorporate the flour. If you don't want to fold the flour in by hand, simply reduce the speed of your stand mixer to an extremely low speed, for instance 1 or 2, and then add the flour mixture in a tablespoon or 2 at a time, as we're showing here. I've done this as an experiment and confirmed that you'll still get a great rise if you mix the flour in at low speed rather than by hand. When all of the flour has been folded into the eggs, we move on to spreading the batter into the pan. Now we'll look at baking our sponge cake in 2 different types of pans, a tall pan and a jelly roll pan. Let's start with a tall sponge cake. Here I'm pouring my batter into an 8 to 9 inch pan. That's 20 to 22 centimeters.
Here, because I know the pan di Spagna should rise taller than the height of my cake pan, I'm going to add a little extra parchment paper in order to give it some stability as it rises. Do line the bottom of your cake pan or other kind of pan with parchment paper when making a sponge cake, but do not line the sides, because as the sponge cake cools, it will pull in on the parchment paper, deforming the sides of your sponge cake. Just like an angel food cake, a sponge cake needs to grab onto the sides in order to get a good rise. Which brings us to another tip: never fill the pan more than 3/4 of the way high.
Bake in a preheated static oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 180 degrees Celsius for 20 minutes. Then lower the temperature 10 degrees and bake for the last 20 minutes.
When the cake is baked, shut the oven off and let the cake sit in the oven for an additional 10 minutes, leaving the door cracked if possible. This lets the cake cool slowly to minimize deflation.
Most sponge cakes will deflate a bit after they are cooled due to the large amount of air in them. However, cooling the cake slowly will drastically reduce deflation. Here's a look at 2 tall sponge cakes, baked and cooled. To cut a sponge cake, be sure to chill the cake in the refrigerator for at least 30 minutes. Sponge cakes are a touch trickier to cut than other cakes because they are so flexible. But if you want to do it, here's how. Use a long, very sharp knife to cut your cake, or a knife with a serrated edge. Start by making an even, shallow score around the entire cake where you plan to cut it.
Making a shallow cut around the entire cake like I've just done is also the first step if you'd like to use a large knife to cut your cake in half. It's easier to make an even cut when you're making a shallow cut. However, I know that some of you might still find it challenging to keep your knife straight while cutting through the entire cake, and so I'm going to show you a little magic trick today that I learned from my mother-in-law years ago. Here I have a regular heavy-duty sewing thread, and I've cut it to a length of about 3 times the diameter of the cake. Now we're going to use the cut that we previously made as a score. Nestle your string in the shallow cut that you made before around the whole cake, like this. And then when you reach the front, cross the string and nestle that in as well. Now you can wrap the string around your fingers to secure it, and now we simply pull. Boom. Perfect layers.
Now let's look at baking a sponge cake in a jelly roll pan to produce a shorter sponge cake ready-made for layers.
When all of the flour has been folded into the eggs, we move on to spreading the batter into the pan. Here I'm using a 15 by 12 inch or a 40 centimeter by 30 centimeter pan lined with parchment paper. I'm baking the sponge cake in a preheated 350-degree static oven for 15 minutes.
The jelly roll pan sponge cake can be cut with a knife or even kitchen scissors. It's perfect for creating easy, perfect layers when you're making a layered cake, such as a mimosa cake or Zuppa Inglese. Now let's take a quick look at some desserts you can make with this sponge cake.
This sponge cake is so popular as a dessert ingredient, you can find it pre-made in Italian groceries. And there's no Italian dessert more famous for featuring the sponge cake than the Zuppa Inglese. The Zuppa Inglese is an easy dessert. It's nothing more than layers of sponge cake inzuppato, or soaked in liquor or fruit juice.
Another famous Italian dessert featuring the sponge cake is the Torta Mimosa. Learn how to make both these 2 delicious desserts on our channel.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the bell for new video notifications.